In this video, I'm going to take some time to explore the examples that hopefully you have now read in the Norton Field Guide. I really recommend that you do not watch this video until you've taken some time to become more familiar with the example that we covered in class on Tuesday. That was the piece on Juno, as well as the other two pieces, which focused on The Fault in Our Stars and the Probability of Miracles, as well as the Game of Thrones video game. So first and foremost, I'm going to start here with the Juno piece, and I'm going to break it down in terms of how the writer chose to organize, again, to give you some options of how it is that you might want to present your ideas when you pick your topic. So this writer chose to have the first paragraph as a very brief synopsis of what happens in the movie. So we learn more about the characters, we learn more about the conflict, and we learn more about what happens with the plot as the baby is given to two characters named Mark and Vanessa. Ultimately, the thesis statement here comes at the end of this very first paragraph. Although the situations of Juno's characters find themselves in and their dialogue may be criticized as unrealistic, the film successfully portrays the emotions of a teen being shoved into maturity way too fast. As we can see here, this is our guiding sentence that we should now expect to be supported in our thesis statement. So now we have the next couple of paragraphs focus on what in the movie is unrealistic. And so what's interesting is that the writer wanted to qualify the thesis statement by not just saying what is in the movie, which is emotion or heart, but wants to also criticize a little bit with what exactly doesn't seem to be too realistic. So we can see that these two paragraphs, 2 and 3, are all about what is unrealistic. And now we have the next three paragraphs, which are paragraphs 4, 5, and 6. And this is all about the heart or the emotion in the movie, with what the dialogue is like, how the acting or the characterization is like, why ultimately the evaluation of this is saying that the movie offers something worthwhile to viewers. What is in this example that's not in the other two examples is a rebuttal paragraph. And you can see here that we have a counterclaim, although I don't necessarily know if it is a very effective one. There's a counterclaim that Juno as a character is not a good role model for teen girls. And this is where you can see a blended quote from Slate as a source, also from Entertainment Weekly. But ultimately, it's refuted by saying that the character shows strength and that she's able to overcome her obstacles. And so there was an attempt to refute that counterclaim. You can then see there is a concluding paragraph that just reiterates in different words how there is emotion within this film, which is ultimately the most important part of what the writer was trying to argue. And then it's a kind of a clever way to end it by saying that this movie is not just another teen movie, which you will notice was the title of the piece. I also like that this was an academic example and that it's offering you an MLA works cited page. The other two examples do not offer that. In terms of criteria, I think it was subtle. And I want to reiterate, and I'm going to say this again in class, that your criteria needs to be overtly, explicitly stated for the reader, because I think you're asking the reader to do too much by having to interpret it. Fortunately, we just have to read it here because it's given to us here in clearly defined criteria that Heinekamp evaluates the film based on these two criteria: the power of its emotion and the realism of its situations, characters, and dialogue. So that is the way that that particular piece was evaluated on those two criteria. If you didn't necessarily see that right away, you're not the only one. I think that it was a little bit too subtle. And the other two examples we're going to go over now also have a lot of subtlety with it. So moving on, this is the second example by Natalie Standiford. And we can see that this piece is begun by having the first two paragraphs give us a description of the two movies, The Fault in Our Stars and The Probability of Miracles. We can see that we have a very short synopsis that details the major aspect or topic that they're focusing on, which is that there are two 16-year-old girls who have cancer. So that is an evaluation that we're now told that's about to be spoken, that there is a difference with how these two cancer patients who are teenagers, how their stories are presented. So we'll now notice that Cam Cooper, she is going to be described and her story is evaluated over paragraphs 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. So that's just the organizational structure. Paragraphs 3 through 7 are detailing Cam's story and what exactly she is doing, trying to live life to the fullest before she passes away. Now we have the next couple paragraphs. It transitions into Hazel Lancaster from Fault in Our Stars, and we can see paragraphs 8, 9, 10, and 11 are all about Hazel and the way that she is overcoming her struggle and the way that she is trying to live life before her passing as well. So you can see that this essay very abruptly ends. I hope none of you give me a conclusion that is this short by just reiterating once again. I think it's a fairly cheesy message, giving you a message about life and having a number of days that are counted. Nothing, of course, is taken for granted. So if you missed the criteria, I can understand because I think it was pretty subtle. I try to mention it here within my quick description, but I think the biggest criterion that was mentioned is how each character lives before she dies. Additionally, I think that other criteria was specifically noting the protagonist's struggle, internal and external struggles. And then also, of course, a couple of quotations, such as this one here. And you also have a couple other partial quotations that just note the personality of the character as presented from the writer. So again, just giving you a quick overview of what that example had in terms of organizational structure and also the criteria that I noted. Lastly, we have our wordplay trumps swordplay. This is all about the Game of Thrones video game. So what is interesting about this one is you can see that the introduction paragraph is telling us how the video game is not like the TV show and how the video game is inferior to the TV show. And so normally you would say, well, then there's going to be harsh or negative evaluation, and that's not true. Actually, it's saying that what the video game has to offer is different from the TV show, and that's a good thing because the TV show offers, as we can see here, better scenery, cinematography, writing, graphics, effects, things like that. What the TV show doesn't have that the video game has is conversations that are so enriching and matter so very much. And so that here is the thesis statement. So it's a little bit unique in how it begins and saying what the video game doesn't have, but that's what makes it good. Similarly, we have a good shooter game, and it talks about what is in a good shooter game, and this isn't a good shooter game. So again, that's kind of unique that the writer is choosing to portray it that way. Again, your words matter, the conversations matter, and so that is the emphasis here, but it's kind of written about in a reverse order. What this piece has that the other pieces doesn't have is context. So we're finding that the Game of Thrones video game was inspired by The Walking Dead. It was also inspired from A Song of Ice and Fire. It's a fantasy series by George R.R. Martin. And so it's just giving you some contextual background. Ultimately, the criteria comes very late in this piece. And you can see that it comes with the choices that you have as characters within the video game. And that is not detailed until the second half of this piece. But it is addressed, but it's in the second half of the body. And then we can see here that at the very end, it's just noting once again that the Game of Thrones is very good as a video game, just like the television show. and it's worth caring about. So ultimately, it's giving you a positive connotation as a piece of writing concludes. Now, before this video ends, I just want to share a couple more things with you. One is this French fry example, and I made a mention in class that I'd share this with you. What I like, there's a couple things that are no good in this example, but what is interesting, at least, is that you can see the context that's given at the beginning of this example, and this is noted in Schoology for you. You have access to this right now. Thomas Jefferson was the first American president to serve French fries at the White House. These date back to the 1600s. The name came from Belgian soldiers who spoke French and told Americans that they're called French fries, things like that. So it's just kind of interesting background to kind of introduce the topic to the reader. It does then detail that in this evaluation, they're going to focus on the French fries at Wendy's, Burger King, and McDonald's. To be a little bit more precise, these are our criteria: presentation, taste, texture, smell, and crunchiness. So we can see that's a lot of criteria, but that's the way that the writer is going to choose to evaluate. So it's going to be all about Wendy's now. So we can expect, as the reader, I'm going to read all about Wendy's French fries in terms of these criteria. Okay. Then we're going to move on to McDonald's, all based on that criteria again, and then based on Burger King and the criteria that occurred at that location. So ultimately, this writer is choosing to say who did it best. And so that would be the challenge of that writer, to be able to learn the food vocabulary about how people write about presentation of French fries, about taste and texture, crunchiness, things like that, all about French fries. So this example, again, is noted in Schoology. You can take a look at it. This is not a terrific A paper. However, it does give you a better idea of how you can explicitly, overtly put your criteria within your paper. I realize that a lot of you are brainstorming. And so what I want to do here is suggest that you go to Google, and let's say, for example, that you are interested in musical album evaluation. You can just simply take a look and see how people actually evaluate music, if there are terms that they actually use. And so, for example, and again, this is not scholarly, however, it does give you a starting place that perhaps you can take a look at the authenticity of the music. And if you're a music person, maybe you know more about what that means, or what exactly makes it accurate, or what exactly makes this artistic. But I would highly recommend that you take some time to learn more about how people in music talk about and judge music. That is a prerequisite if you are going to be doing something with music. Or, for example, if you were going to do something with restaurants, let's go to restaurant evaluation criteria. And again, they can take a look here at this example, deliciously.com. And here are some criteria that you could potentially, that's not it, there it is, that you could potentially choose from. Okay, value, ambiance, location, service, hygiene. These are, again, just options that you have. And again, if you're going to be doing something like this, you should know how people talk about location. They talk about ambiance, things like that. Lastly, let's say you want to do something like who did it better. Let's say, for example, you wanted to watch a State of the Union speech from President Obama and a State of the Union speech from President Trump. You could, for example, take a look at how people look at criteria for speeches. And so I can take a look at something like this and have criteria such as voice, body language, and you can just pick any one of these things, several of these things, to possibly do that. So hopefully you learn more about criteria today in organization of a piece. Please plan on having a mini conference with me Thursday or Friday.